They turned 38-year-old Miriam Calloway away at the depot door and told her she was too old to be anyone's wife. But Miriam had sold everything she owned to get here. In the winter of 1885, outside the frostbitten Montana town of Alder Creek, the man who had sent for her, Bennett Hale, owned the mercantile, the livery, and the opinion of every man who owed him money, which was most of them. The women on the platform saw her standing there alone, her worn carpetbag at her feet, her breath making small clouds in the cold. They looked away. Because in Alder Creek, you did not embarrass Bennett Hale. Not if you wanted credit at the store come spring. But what Bennett Hale didn't know was that a grieving, soft-spoken rancher named Elias Drummond, a man the town pitied for his ragged coat and his silence, would step off his horse, pick up her bag, and ask where she needed to go. This is their story, a tale of a woman the world called too old and unwanted, and the man who already knew what the world did not. The morning coach from Billings arrived at 9:30. Miriam Calloway stepped down onto the platform with the posture of a woman who had rehearsed this moment 100 times on the long ride north. She wore her good dress, dark blue wool, mended twice at the hem, and she carried a single carpetbag that held everything she had brought from Ohio. Bennett Hale was waiting. But not the way she had imagined. He stood with 2 other men from town, arms crossed, looking her over the way a man looks at a horse he already suspects is lame. "How old did you say you were?" he asked. No greeting. No hat lifted. 38, Miriam said. Her voice was steady. Hale made a sound low in his throat. He turned to the man beside him, his brother-in-law, she would later learn, and the 2 of them exchanged a look that needed no words. "The letter said you were experienced," Hale said. "I needed someone who could keep up with a working ranch. Not someone worn out before she starts." He picked up the note as she had answered, her own handwriting, her own careful words, and folded it once, twice, and tucked it into his coat like it was a receipt he no longer needed. "I'll send you back on the afternoon coach," he said. "I'll pay the fare." The platform was not empty. A woman by the ticket window heard every word and did not move. 2 men near the water trough watched and said nothing. A girl of about 12 stood frozen beside her mother, wide-eyed. Miriam did not cry. She had not come this far to cry in front of Bennett Hale. But her hands, she could not stop her hands from shaking. She pressed them together and looked out past the depot at the frozen flats of Montana stretching away in every direction, white and indifferent and enormous. The afternoon coach. That was 4 hours away. She sat down on the bench outside the depot, set her carpetbag between her feet, and waited. The cold came up through the wooden slats. She could feel it in her back teeth. Elias Drummond rode into Alder Creek the same morning for salt and a new axe handle. He was 41, lean, and quiet in the way of a man who had gotten out of the habit of speaking to anyone who would answer. His coat was old. His boots were older. The bay horse he rode looked better fed than he did, which was the truth. 3 years before, in the winter of 1882, his wife Catherine had died of fever 6 days after their daughter. He had buried them both on the hill behind the house, beneath the lone cottonwood, and he had not moved from that ranch since. He hired one hand in the summers. He worked alone in the winters. He did not go to church. He did not go to dances. He nodded to people on the street, and they nodded back, and they all understood each other perfectly. The town pitied him. He knew it. Pity was easier to manage than conversation. He tied his horse at the rail outside Hale's mercantile, and was walking past the depot when he saw her. A woman alone on the bench. Dark coat, no gloves. Carpetbag at her feet. The cold working itself into her in the slow, patient way the cold always won. He had seen that look before. Not on anyone else. On himself. In the window glass of his own kitchen, the winter after Catherine died. It was the look of a person who has just been told they do not matter. Elias Drummond stopped walking. He was not a man who made quick decisions. He stood for a moment, hat in his hands, the frost on the platform boards glittering between them. Then he walked over and said the only thing he could think of. "You need to get out of this cold." Miriam looked up at the man standing over her and said nothing. He was not impressive. The coat was thin. The hat was bent at the brim. His face was weathered past what his years probably were, the way outdoor men go. But his eyes were level and calm, and he was not smiling the way men smile when they want something. "Ma'am," he said again, "there's a stove at the feed store. Ed won't mind." "I'm waiting for the coach," Miriam said. "That's 4 hours." He glanced at her hands. She had stopped pressing them together, and the shaking was visible. "You'll be half frozen by noon." She picked up her carpetbag and stood, because she had too much dignity to sit there and argue with a stranger about whether she was cold. He led her to the feed store 2 doors down. It was warm and smelled of grain and horses, and the man behind the counter, Ed, apparently, looked up, took in the situation without a word, and pulled a stool near the iron stove. "Coffee?" Ed said. "Please," said Miriam, and her voice cracked slightly on the word. Just slightly. She was mortified. Elias Drummond paid for the coffee and sat on a barrel and asked her nothing for a long while. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Did he treat you poorly?" "He was honest about his opinion," Miriam said carefully. "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him. "I have a ranch 12 miles out," he said, still not looking at her. "I am not in the market for a wife. I want to say that plainly so there's no misunderstanding." A pause. "But I need someone who can keep accounts and manage a household. I can't offer much. Separate quarters. Fair wages. A contract if you want one." Now he looked at her. "No obligation beyond that. You can leave in the spring if you want to leave." Miriam Calloway held the coffee cup in both hands and looked at this quiet, worn-out man who had just given her, without fanfare, without expectation, the first real choice she'd had in months. "I'll need to see the contract in writing," she said. "That's fair," said Elias Drummond. Word got back to Bennett Hale before sundown. He came to the feed store himself, just as Elias was helping Miriam up onto the wagon seat. Hale was a big man and he used his size the way some men do, walking close, filling the space between you and wherever you were trying to go. "Drummond," he said. Elias took up the reins and waited. "You're making a fool of yourself." Hale's voice was friendly. That was the most dangerous kind. "She's a 40-year-old spinster from Ohio with nothing to recommend her. I'm doing you a kindness telling you." "She's 38, Elias said. "And I didn't ask." Hale's jaw tightened. "I have notes on your property, Drummond. 3 of them. Don't make this complicated." There was a long silence. The cold pressed down on the street. Somewhere behind them a horse shifted and stamped. "I know about the notes," Elias said, and clicked his tongue to the horse, and they moved forward. Hale stood in the street and watched them go, and his expression was the expression of a man who has just realized he may have made an error in his calculations. The Drummond ranch was not what Miriam expected. The house was modest. The barn was in good repair. But inside the house, on the desk in the small back room, were ledgers. Neat columns of figures. Land deeds. Investment letters from a law office in Helena bearing the seal of a firm she recognized. Her own father had done business with their Chicago partners years ago. She was not snooping. The door was open and she had been asked to take inventory of the household stores. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the papers for exactly 3 seconds before she understood. That evening she set a plate of salt pork and cornbread in front of Elias Drummond and said, without preface, "You're not a poor man." He looked up from the table. "The coat," she said. "The hat. The horse, which is actually a very fine horse, I notice, now that I've looked. You don't dress or spend like a man with 3 mortgages he can't cover." She folded her hands on the table. "Bennett Hale thinks he holds leverage over you. Does he?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "He holds paper on land I don't need. I've let him think it matters." "Why?" He picked up his fork. "Because men who think they have power over you stop watching you." The deputy sheriff, Tom Aldridge, had come to Elias the previous autumn about irregularities in Hale's lending records. Elias had been quietly gathering evidence since then: letters, ledgers, a statement from a widow in Red Hollow who had lost her property to Hale's manufactured debt. He had been waiting for the right moment. "I can read a ledger," Miriam said. Elias looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I noticed that about you this afternoon." 3 weeks later, Tom Aldridge rode out to the Drummond ranch with a warrant. It was not for Elias. Miriam had spent those 3 weeks at the desk in the back room, working through Hale's loan records against the original land titles that Elias had gathered. The fraud was not subtle once you knew what to look for. Inflated interest. Forged signatures. A pattern of selecting debtors who were widowed, elderly, or without family in the territory. The case was laid out in a clear hand across 14 pages of organized summary. Miriam had done this kind of work before, in her father's accounting office in Ohio. She had not imagined it would matter again. It mattered now. The town of Alder Creek learned several things on the day Bennett Hale was arrested. The first was that his lending operation had defrauded at least 9 families over 6 years. The second was that Elias Drummond had been working with the county prosecutor for 3 months. The third, and this one moved through the town like water finding its level, was that Elias Drummond did not have 3 unpayable mortgages. He had, quietly and without display, purchased outright the deed to his land, his neighbor's land, and a substantial piece of the river valley to the north, which the railroad had been seeking to acquire for 2 years. The women who had looked away on the platform did not look away now. The girl of 12 who had watched Miriam with wide eyes, her name was Pearl, and her mother was one of the 9 families, came to the ranch with her mother to say thank you. Miriam gave them tea and did not make them feel small for needing it. Bennett Hale was taken to Helena. He did not come back. The spring came late that year, as Montana springs do. The cottonwood on the hill put out its first pale leaves in early May, and Elias Drummond stood beneath it for a long while one Sunday morning, looking at the 2 small crosses there, saying the things he had learned to say to them. Goodbye, perhaps. Or only, I am still here. Or only their names. Miriam did not follow him up the hill. She waited at the porch with coffee, and when he came back down he took the cup and stood beside her, and they watched the fog burn off the valley together. You could have told me sooner, she said. About the money. You didn't ask. I'm asking now. He was quiet for a moment. My father built this ranch without anyone knowing how much he had, he said. He said the moment a man shows his hand, someone starts figuring out how to take it. He wasn't wrong. No. A pause. But Catherine knew. From the start. She said a man who hides everything is just a man who's afraid of being seen. Miriam looked out at the valley. She sounds like she was wise, she said. She was. He turned the cup in his hands. I think she would have liked you. In June, Elias Drummond rode to Alder Creek and asked the circuit judge about the requirements for a marriage license. He came home and told Miriam what the requirements were and said that it was entirely her decision and he would not press. She said yes on the same afternoon. She did not make him ask twice. They were married at the ranch, with Ed from the feed store as witness and Pearl's mother bringing a cake that leaned slightly to the left and tasted extraordinary. There were no crowds. There were no speeches. Elias took her hand and made his promises in a low voice, and she made hers back, and they were the most expensive thing either of them had ever owned, not in money, but in the only currency that finally matters. They say a woman is worth what the world says she is. The world is wrong. She is worth what she builds, what she endures, and what she chooses when she is finally, at last, given the choice. Miriam Calloway had waited 38 years for that choice. She did not waste it.